building a fence and you're wondering what fence board should I use, today we're talking about these three options here. These are all Western red cedar, very commonly seen on fences across the Pacific Northwest, specifically here in Oregon and Washington where we work. And there's just a lot of things that homeowners do not know or are not educated about before they install their fence. And so I'm really hoping this video can provide some clarity around what you're seeing out there on different fences and or what you're being quoted. Over here on the right is a clear grade. In the middle is a number 1 grade. And on the left is a number 2 grade. And the reason that they're graded differently is it's a separation of the quality. So as these trees are milled at the mill, picture a big conveyor belt or a factory line. They take the tree and they split it up into all these little pieces, and then those pieces come down the conveyor like that, and they need to separate them into the correct categories. And so they take the high quality ones and they put them in the clear section. They take the quality right below that with some knots and they put that in the number 1 section, and then you have the number 2 section. And there's actually several other categories below the number 2 section. You might commonly hear boards being labeled as classic boards. It's actually not a super common one here in the Northwest, but you have classic, you have rustic, you have number 3 and better. These are all going to be, down here in this category, so they're actually going to have more defects. So now that we've discovered these 3 grades and some of these other ones, let's talk about them a little more in depth. Over here, this clear board, this is going to be the most expensive out of these 3, maybe $1 or $2 more per board, I'm not sure exacts. But this board here is going to be free or clear of any defects, or most defects. So as you look at these boards, you're not going to see any knots. If there is knots on a clear board, typically it's the size of your pinky or less. The number 1 board, you're going to start to see some knots appearing. There won't be too many big defects, but there will be some knots. Mostly are smaller, but you are going to have some bigger knots like that. And the number 2 board is going to be introducing a lot larger knots and even a lot of defects, like these corners being chipped out. Down here you'll see an example. This might have been the corner of a tree or maybe where there's a limb, but you see this is all messed up. There was probably bark there at one point, and this is the very edge of the tree. So the reason that this is important is it greatly changes the look of your fence depending on if you have no knots versus a lot of knots. But also structurally, these boards with the large knots are not as strong. And if you drive around the neighborhood, you'll see, if you see a fence that has boards that are really bowed or broken or cracked, whatever, it's typically going to be because of this weak point that the knot or some of these defects have created. Whereas if you move into these higher grades, these boards are stronger. They have less weak points. This board here, it has 0 knots, to form a weak point. Whereas this one, it has a knot here, which you see there's already a crack forming in there, and then a knot here. This creates a weak point in this middle. So maybe a soccer ball hits that board right there after it's been up for a couple years, that might crack. If you kick this with a soccer ball, unless you're David Beckham, probably not going to break it. So hopefully this gives some education on the different grades, the different options. I personally, on my own home, I would never consider a board that you'll see at a lot of big box stores or some other contractors that are offering the lower grades. All of those stores and contractors have higher grades available. So ask for those higher grades. Don't settle for less, because they might assume you just want the cheapest when in fact you just want to spend a little bit more on a higher grade board like one of these 3 options here.